I've been working on a deep dive into the Middle East, mostly stimulated by the war and realizing that I didn't know enough about an imperial history of the Middle East. Two parts, which I've titled an imperial inheritance, because what I realized was with the Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916, the fault lines of the modern Middle East were drawn by the British and the French. And I think sometimes, and you know me, I'm both an rabid Anglophile and a rabid Francophile, if such a term isn't schizophrenic to be both. Joan of Arc would argue with that, and Churchill would probably argue that I can't be both. But de Gaulle certainly would have. But
Yes.
so a lot of the problems, sometimes it does annoy me a bit when they try to France in 2003 not wanting to go into Iraq. I'm saying that's a completely legitimate thing. Don't go into Iraq, right?
Right.
Or our allies not wanting to support us here, which is legitimate. I'm just saying I think sometimes post-imperial powers are a little too quick to wash their hands of any kind of culpability for destabilizing a region, right? It's not just, and we inherited a structure that was predicated on support for Zionism or opposition to Zionism and extraction of oil from the region. We didn't come in there and create that, right? And what I didn't realize, and I don't want to go off on a whole tear here, but I think you'll find this fascinating, that the first backers of Zionism, in terms of militant Zionism, or the Ergen and the Stern gang in Palestine, were the French, because the British were backing pro-Arab insurgents in Syria and Lebanon, trying to run the French out of the region, just at the height of World War II. British soldiers are
Yeah.
fighting and dying in the Bocage in Normandy, and with de Gaulle's behest, they're funding Zionist terrorism in Palestine. And that's not me, that's not an endorsement or me, it's not me saying anything about Zionism. What it was a terrorist campaign. They would have said it at the time, right?
Right.
The
Right.
King David Hotel bombing. So let's not pretend that like imperialism hasn't always been a dirty business. And this was 80 years ago now. And what do you expect? I mean, Britain and France have fought something like 41 wars since the 1100s. They're just going to turn it off and with World War One.
How do you define and where do you draw lines between national interest and imperialism? Where do those two things begin and end? Because they certainly intersect.
I think imperialism has been the normal form of human government since time immemorial. You have the Greeks displacing the Persians, the Romans displacing the Carthaginians, the French and the British. And the imperial handoff in the 1950s in the Middle East, where we're taking over Britain's commitments in the Middle East. Iraq and Iran were British protectorates. We step in there, and then we step into the French quagmire in Vietnam. What was the Cold War if we're looking at it in realpolitik terms, as an imperial struggle between the Soviet Union and American imperialism? What is going on between now and China? And this is where sometimes when I'm a bit more hawkish, I guess, than some of my colleagues on the left, is because we're in another imperial competition. And to the point about Trump being the worst enemy American imperialism has, he's scuttled any soft power we have in the global south, and China is rushing to fill that vacuum.